This is the Forgecast, your eye into the who's who and what's what in cybersecurity and the cloud. Each episode, we bring you fresh perspectives, personal stories, insights, and advice from leaders, innovators, and change makers forging a stronger future.
Hello and welcome to the Forgecast. My name is Alberto and I'm going to be your host. And I have the pleasure to have Andreu with me today. I had the opportunity to work with Andreu at Bayshore Networks, where he was chief architect and CTO, and he exhibited a lot of leadership skills and great insights about building resilient products for a very tough market, which was the Internet of Things, and worked with some of the most sophisticated industry players in order to safeguard critical infrastructure sites. So, Andreu, thank you very, very much for being here. I know today you are part of TWOU, which is a public company, and we'll jump into more details a little bit about what they do and what your role there is. But what always impressed me was the fact and how you got to this industry, and also how passionate you are for trying to increase the pipeline of diverse candidates to be able to do that. So thank you for agreeing to be with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So why don't we get going on your personal story, because this is also part of this forecast is, where do you come from? How do you get into cybersecurity, and how did that passion come about? So can you tell us a little about yourself and your beginnings and how you got eventually to this industry?
Absolutely. So I am an immigrant to the United States. I was born in Cuba and came relatively young, went straight to New York. So we were not one of the Cuban families that stayed in Miami. So I grew up in Queens, New York, and really, the area I grew up in dictated a lot of my paths in life. I did not grow up in a nice area; it was pretty rough, and in those days, we were one of the very few Hispanic families in the neighborhood. And so that certainly made for an interesting set of dynamics, especially in terms of, whether you are of a certain type of personality, whether you're, tough personality or not. And so I found out very early what I was made of. And I definitely appreciate the way I grew up. I think it prepared me for a lot of my journeys in life. So, in terms of getting into this field, my intention was to have a career in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And so I went into federal law enforcement.
You go to school before law enforcement, or?
I did. I went to John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. And so I entered the Drug Enforcement Administration in 1991, swore in 1992, February of 92. So my intent was never to go into tech. I really had no interest in any of this. And back in those days, tech was very different. But, you like they say, you can't run from who you are. And so no matter what I did, no matter what value I added, because I have evidence of value that I added for sure in terms of my field work, I always ended up on the tech side. And I had a defining moment while working at the DEA, where one of the older agents that was mentoring me said to me, and this was profound for me, but he said to me, look, no matter what you do on the street, when you end up in court, it's your word against theirs. Mm-hmm. And any defense attorney that's really good will make you look really bad. Irrefutable evidence comes through technology. No one can argue that. And that was profound to me because I really believed in the mission. And, one of DEA's strong suits is that everybody that works there, at least that I encountered, was very mission oriented. And so I realized that my greater value add was in that evidence gathering that could not be rebutted in court. And so I ended up spending the majority of my career there building what's known as Title III technologies or wiretap technologies.
Yeah.
And that encompassed everything from some hardware, from microphones, really small microphones, hidden cameras in walls, I mean, we tapped everything. And then all of the software on the back end to collate and correlate all of the gathered data and basically enforce chain of custody and make it all stand up in court. And so I learned a lot very fast in terms of the integrity of data and how to maintain that integrity such that there was value in the evidential content.
Wow. All these terms, chain of custody and all that, are pretty much applicable today for cybersecurity, because right now we're chasing criminals. These are digital cyber criminals, and they leave footsteps everywhere in how you gather them and make it irrefutable, and chain of custody and time stamping and everything else makes it irrefutable. It's interesting how that shaped your early thinking to come into the digital world and having to do that. Wow. Great perspective that I think many have. So how long did you spend at the DEA?
So I was there, I was a little short of 10 years, so 9 and change.
Mm-hmm. And there were probably times in which, I recall the timing that you had was, of course, drug enforcement and all the different things that were happening, a lot of activity in Latin America and different theaters that I'm sure you have to be involved given the timing.
Well, given the timing and the fact that I was bilingual, or I am bilingual, I had an interesting set of skills as far as they were concerned. And I had, like I said, I had every intention of using every skill that I had for the sake of enforcement. It just was not it wasn't in the cards for me, and that's okay. I just came to terms with that and moved on with life. But I loved my time there. I loved the people that I worked with. I loved the fact that everybody was so mission-centric, so mission-oriented. So yeah, it was a wonderful way for me to start my career.
Well, thank you for your service, because a lot of times I'm sure there's a lot of things that you wish you want to share, but you cannot talk about it. But I think, again, in trying to make our environment safe, and we're not out of the woods. It's still, that's something that is constant fight. But now the whole theater has moved to the digital realm. But then you transitioned to the commercial sector. How was that transition? Obviously, you got some very interesting grounding of what it takes to be in this space. So what's your first commercial job?
So my first job out of the government was at a small EdTech company in New York City called the Princeton Review. Mm-hmm. And if you want to talk about culture shock, it was culture shock because, I came from a very structured, regimented environment. People respected chain of command. People respected positions. If you put a policy in place, people adhered to the policy. And then I left the government, and it was like, yeah, no, this does not work that way in the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
At the Princeton Review, it was a very dynamic environment, very fast paced, a lot of hours because it was really a startup for all intents and purposes. And so the pace was crazy. It was a little tough for me because at the time my third son had just been born, and so I had 3 very young children, 3 sons at the time, and that was tough because we were working 7 days a week, 15 hours a day, that kind of craziness. But it was a transition for me. It was coming out of the regimented space into the kind of Wild West of corporate America.
But do you do cybersecurity at the time, or would you just need broad infrastructure?
So I ran all of IT.
Okay.
The kindergarten through 12th grade division of the Princeton Review. So that encompassed information security. Back then, cybersecurity wasn't really a thing yet. It was information security. So I did have that as part of my remit, but I handled everything having to do with IT and engineering and software engineering.
Mm-hmm. And then you went to a much bigger company after that, right?
Yeah, I spent basically a year at the Princeton Review. I had 2 offers to leave. One was for a Japanese bank, which really, really excited me, but it required like about 60% of my time in Tokyo.
Right.
And with such a young family, that would have been tough. So the other offer was with Ogilvy and Mather to come in as part of their worldwide group. And I came in as a manager, and there I owned I performed all of what are now the CISO tasks, but back then that title didn't exist. So I inherited all of those responsibilities along with everything having to do with application and software. And I was there almost 11 years. I went from manager all the way to chief architect globally and made partner at the firm. So that was another really large growth experience for me because it was the first time I was forced into a global role. And I mean literally global, to the point that I built 3 data centers, one in Hong Kong, one in London, one in New York. And this is pre-cloud. There were no cloud providers. You had to build everything. And so there were actually a couple of magazine articles on my work back then because we did some groundbreaking work with data level replication across the globe, across all 3 data centers. And then on the front end, we were one of the first adopters of GSLB technology so that we were truly highly available from a global perspective. As a matter of fact, when the big blackout hit New York a couple of years after September 11th, none of our customers even realized we had a New York data center because there was no downtime. Everything automatically just routed over to London or Hong Kong, depending on where you were, and we were in business. I'm very proud of that because I built that. That was a mammoth task for someone like me. You know, I had worked in smaller environments up until that point.
I'm sure you had to face a lot of regulations and policies that other countries would, I guess, put in. And today, it's gotten a little more complex, but I'm sure that you started getting the taste that it's not just about putting the data center, but their regulatory environment you have to be aware of, right?
Regulatory and cultural, believe it or not.
That's right.
I ran into a number of cultural issues that had you told me ahead of time, I would have said, you're kidding. But then I faced them and it was like, oh my God, this is real. I won't point any out specifically because, you know, it would specify a country and I don't want to come off as biased, but it was really interesting to see how certain cultures approached certain things if they didn't build it themselves.
Yeah.
That was fascinating to me from a human perspective.
Yeah. And having to build a team that had the same goal and making sure that the resilience that we built in what serviced all the customers globally, et cetera. It was a great experience.
Oh, absolutely. So, you know, our customers, I think what helped me mature quickly is that our customer list is basically really large customers, right? If you look at Ogilvy's, you know, customer base, especially in those days, none of them were small players. And so they all demanded certain things like resilience, high availability. There was no appetite for downtime. And so that forces you to think a certain way.
Yeah. And teaches us some design points. So when you would want to design a product or get into the commercial sector to offer something, those are things that you now bake into your thinking. And you were a founding member of the Bayshore's networks team. So maybe how was that experience? I know it's part of Upstart right now, but how was that experience and that transition? Because you go from a bigger company, very global, to now an area that is very much needed still, and again, supposed to be growing very fast in the future. But also you were in the process of building a business that also had to hit the pandemic. So maybe a little bit of reflection on how Bayshore came about and the mission or the vision you had with the rest of the founding team.
So yeah, so I went from basically a company of 30,000 to a company of 3.
Oh, wow.
Very, very different dynamics. But I'll tell you, I learned a lot in Bayshore that I would have never learned otherwise, especially on the business side, because you're forced to be part of the business, right? You know, the founder of Bayshore is a brilliant individual, and he was, from a tech perspective, a great mentor. So he really, you know, forced my hand to learn different elements of technology, especially from an uptime perspective. Now, not so much from a scale perspective, in other words, network or horizontal scale, from an actual appliance perspective, and the fact that the appliance has to be resilient at all costs. Very, very, you know, it's like going from the macro to the micro. And in his case, the micro was an appliance, a physical appliance in its first incarnation. And, you know, learning from him in terms of all of the minutia that you have to pay attention to make sure that these appliances are resilient and do not lose data, when appropriate and stuff like that. That was a great learning experience for me because I had not dealt with that level of granularity until I got to Bayshore. And so, at Bayshore, the first challenge really was taking a platform and turning it into a product, because there's a difference. And so turning that original platform into a product was a substantial amount of work, but I think the real benefit was that we were wise enough to do it based on, potential customer feedback. So we weren't just inventing something. We were taking feedback loops from the field and implementing the notions that we were getting. The biggest flaw, just to be fair, right? I just touched on the positive. The biggest flaw that we had is that we assumed that there were going to be quote unquote experts out there that could write rule sets that could be enforced on network flows for protocols that were hardly understood, especially at that time. That was a massive flaw. But it was a flaw that forced, at least me in particular, to think very creatively and find a solution for the problem. I ended up being the author of an internationally granted patent based on that work, because what we had to do was figure out how to, in essence, create a machine learning engine that had to operate real time on network flows. There was no, offboarding to a massive network of neural nodes or anything like that. There was none of that. It was, listen, here are the flows, figure it out and generate a policy or rule sets off of the flows. And we did. And I think that's one of the features that basically made that product actually appealing from a commercial perspective. So again, a lot of deep learning there, a lot of, thinking creatively. But it was wonderful to be able to come together with the team and have the skills to implement that creativity, right? To actually execute on those creative ideas. And so a lot of learning, very thankful for my time at Bayshore. And it was a bit of a roller coaster, but hey, that's the start of life.
Yeah. And I remember the thing that attracted us to Bayshore was really the team, the sophistication of the technology. We were doing references. There were a lot of very leading industry pundits, or they would say, hey, this is the best technology yet ahead of its time, perhaps. But on the other hand, you were protecting some precious critical infrastructure in New York and power plants and nuclear power plants for your technology. And I said, wow, if they can do that with a small team, imagine what you could do when you have unlimited resources, et cetera. So super impressed. But it, obviously, OPSWAT was very impressed with what you guys built and eventually, took over the team, right? And there was an interesting transition for you. And eventually you moved on, but maybe talking about, most companies in cybersecurity get acquired. So that's part of this acquisition, which you went through already. Some of the lessons learned and how you keep the teams together and things like that will be important to maybe reflection.
Yeah, I think what helped me was I'm always a people first person. I always take care of my teams. Evidence of that is I have people working for me now, where I am now, that started with me at Ogilvy. So they've been with me over 20 years, over multiple jobs. And so when we were doing the initial negotiations for being acquired, my clear directive on a personal level was to make sure the team ended up okay. Mm-hmm. Even if it meant, I had to walk away sacrificing all my time and not walking away at a more lucrative stage in my life. That's okay. I took care of my team, and I'm okay with that. I think you have to do right by people. But from a more business or tech perspective, one of the things that I learned from getting acquired is that you have to have all your ducks in order. Because when the acquiring entity comes in to do their analysis, if anything's out of line, they're going to catch it, right? If you're lacking documentation, if your code's sloppy, if your processes are weak, all of that becomes very real very quickly. Mm-hmm. And startups, come on, let's be realistic. Startups cut corners, and they have to do what they have to do to survive, right? And we were no different. And so we had to scramble to put a lot of things in place that, might have existed here, but didn't exist in black and white. And those were some hard lessons. Another big lesson that I walked away with, which I'm happy I did because it had an impact where I am now, was that external validation of maturity matters.
Oh, yeah.
And what I mean by that is, for instance, we did IEC 62443 for the products at Bayshore. When you first go down that path, it's a nuisance, right? It's an annoyance. It's like, oh man, I don't want to have to go through this process or whatever. But you don't realize the value of, that third-party validation of what you've built. And when the acquiring process started, the acquisition process, I realized the value very quickly, and I was really glad we had gone through that. I actually, to quote myself, I wish we would have done it earlier, and I wish we would have done a few more. But, they cost money and take time. So we did what we could. To your point, at that stage, the pandemic was already hitting, and things were getting kind of tight and a little crazy in the world. So I'm actually really happy with the way things turned out. The team ended up in a good place, and I think all in all, it was a positive for me on a personal level.
Yeah, it was positive. You created in the team, the founding team, the overall team, I think created something a lot of value. Today is adding value and protecting some critical infrastructure as part of OpsWat. So that's part of being a successful outcome. But then talking about networks and people that you work with and that people work with you, then the opportunity at TWOU come up. So I think you knew somebody that knew somebody who worked with you before, then that's how TWOU comes about, isn't it?
Yeah, so it goes back to my days at the Princeton Review. So some of the folks that worked for me at the Princeton Review stayed in that space for 20 plus years and were founding members of TWOU. And we had stayed in touch. We became good friends over the years. And when they heard that we were getting acquired, they said, "Hey, help us build the cybersecurity program here. We're focused on education." And they genuinely care about their students, customers, right? And so I thought it was a good fit for me, because not only is it putting into practice all the tech knowledge that I had gained, it went back to that mission, right? The mission is the student having a great outcome, the student having a safe environment to learn in, and that resonated with me. So to me, it was like, oh, well, yeah, this makes sense, right? Plus, it's nice to know the people there already, right? That always helps.
Eliminate that surprise that, who are you working with, that, second guessing each other and all that. I don't know that a lot of people know what TWOU does. Maybe bring a little context.
Sure.
What do you guys do? Who are your customers? Are you just a regional player? What does TWOU do? So just to understand the scope of responsibilities that you have now as a CISO.
Yep. So we're an education technology platform company.
Okay.
And as a platform company, we basically bring together universities or education providers and students. And so we have partnerships with 200 plus major universities, and they basically provide their professors their content on the platform that TWOU provides. You'll hear the term TWOU edX because we acquired edX, and edX is really the foundational platform that we operate under now. But anyway, the platform brings together those providers, the university providers, with students that are interested in degree programs, courses, alternative credentials. So as of right now, there are, I believe the last count was 46 million active students.
Oh, wow.
And then there are a lot more from the legacy systems that I still am responsible for their data, even though they're not active students. And so the ultimate, N million number is much larger than 46. But that should give you a decent sense of the size of the ecosystem. It's definitely not small.
And you have universities not just in the U.S., right?
Oh yeah, we have in Australia, South Africa, England. Yeah, we partner with some major players.
That's excellent. And then so effectively we're an online delivery platform of content and education, probably in testing. They do a lot of the stuff that somebody has to deal with when it comes to distance learning. And it's probably, I'm sure that during the pandemic you also got a little bit of higher demand and decreased concerns about privacy and laws that start emerging from the EU, from data privacy and things like that. And all of a sudden, okay, well, all right, we built it to be resilient and to have all these things in mind, but now all of a sudden you have to be looking at emerging regulations that come from all these bodies, not only in the U.S., that you have to be cognizant and see how you can accommodate those, right?
So TWOU was very forward-thinking on our way of privacy way before I showed up.
Okay.
They had a really strong chief privacy officer and a very solid privacy program. So I can definitely take no credit for any of that work. That was already in place before me. And, to be totally fair to them, they run a really powerful program. So the global privacy concerns, I feel are in very good hands with the folks that run that program. So TWOU takes that very seriously. Like I said, their mission, orientation, vibe, the DNA of the company is super strong. And privacy comes along with that, right? You want to protect your students and give them a safe environment.
That's great. So the design point is the student. You've been also made more active in the speaker circuit and sharing your experiences and all that. And we saw you recently speak at the Global Cyber Conference in Zurich just a few months ago. And during your statements, and I guess that you tried to emphasize, it was the human quality in cybersecurity. How is that important? Do you mind sharing that for our audience and why you tried to say that, especially when it comes to AI and the adoption of new technologies?
Sure. Yeah, I just started picking up on the fact that so many folks in the industry are trying to, I don't know, almost like dispel the human factor. They want to just make this a technical situation or an AI type, situation. And none of that is real. The human factor is very real. It's, very much still one of the biggest challenges that we have as an industry. But the human factor, when I talk about it, is two-dimensional. There's the dimension of the users, right? The folks that we deal with. But then there's us. Because at the end of the day, you take this is probably going to be an unpopular statement, but it's my observation. A lot of folks in the C-suite, if you will, of major corporations, they don't really have tremendously good people skills. And you have to understand that, for instance, when you go to present to a board and you're trying to get a message across, or more importantly, you're asking for funding, that's a game that depends on your human connection and your human communication skills, right? There's no AI engine involved, right? There's no, automation. There's no process. It's you as a human relating to a number of other humans, and that's a challenge. Because, for instance, if you walk into a room and there's 7 people in the room, do you honestly think that one style and set of messaging is going to resonate equally with 7 people? That's not the way humans work. And so the whole point I was trying to get across is when you're translating risk to upper management, to an auditor, to whoever, you have to resonate with that human on a one-on-one level in order to effectively relay your message. And I think that's super important. And by the way, it's a skill that takes me all the way back to the early 90s at DEA, because DEA is a very human function. You're not chasing robots, you're chasing humans. Mm-hmm. And for instance, if you have to sit down with a human and try to extract information from them, you have to have some personality, you have to have some people skills, you have to have conversational skills, right? Like, for instance, if you're if you happen to have to extract information from somebody that comes from the Caribbean. They're not afraid of law enforcement, but they love baseball. So if you can tactfully start talking about baseball, you start to see their guard go down, and all of a sudden the conversation starts to become more on a human level, and the next thing you know, you've gotten all the information you need. And it all started because of baseball. So you got to know how to talk to people, right? And so what I like to do, for instance, in that example of 7 on a board, I like to establish a one-on-one relationship with each one of those folks if they're open to it, so that we just kind of get to know each other a little bit. I know what resonates with you. I know what upsets you. I get a good sense of you as a human. Then I can start planting seeds that when I show up to talk to all 7 of you, I don't have to go from zero. I'm not starting from scratch. And so it's just a human tactic. And that's what I was talking about in Zurich.
Yeah. You know, you have so many experiences that have shaped the way you are. And I guess now you're sitting in a very important role in a global corporation, trying to impact education, and had other roles where, you know, created technologies and all that. What advice do you have for the younger generation that is trying to get into cybersecurity? Especially akin to the comments you just made, is there's a human aspect of it. It's not just all about technology. So any advice for people that are looking to say, what career should I do, and why should they consider cybersecurity?
My advice to folks is along your journey, find balance. Because it is easy to become very imbalanced in this field, and that just does not lead to anything good. And so, for example, if you're like, you meet a lot of folks with the title that I currently have, the CISO, that are either purely business folks or purely technical folks. And neither one of them really has, in my opinion, the balance to be effective. So, you know, you'll hear like a business CISO from a large company give advice to other people. You sit there and you're like, you know, that advice is only valid if you have a team of 900. What happens if your team is 9, right? You have to think differently. You have to act differently. You have to have different tactics. And so to me, being balanced, being well-rounded gives you that type of agility that irrespective of whatever environment you're in, you can figure out how to succeed, right? If you have to roll your sleeves up, you roll your sleeves up and you get stuff done. But that implies that you have the knowledge that you've gained over the years to be able to roll your sleeves up and get it done. If you're a pure business person, you can't do that. You don't have the skills. On the contrary, if you're purely technical and you don't know how to talk to a board, you have no personality, but you're technically brilliant, you're not going to succeed neither. And so to me, it's all about finding balance.
And it's not just about taking computer science degrees. And so when you're even in college and saying, what career do I follow? It's try to look for well-rounded education that is going to prepare you to, you know, for whatever situation you may have to be able to do that. And because you know, we know that there's a big shortage of professionals in our field, and we get engaged and involved with nonprofits that are trying to encourage that. I know you do a lot for your community. Can you share some of the things that you are working with, try to increase diversity, given that we've been very fortunate to do what we do right now?
So I am a mentor through Cybersecurity, and we help underprivileged, underrepresented individuals focus their efforts in terms of getting into the cybersecurity field. That work to me is very rewarding because, you know, I came up in an era where none of this existed. You had to scratch, kick, punch, fight, you know, bite, fight for every inch you got. There were no DEI efforts back in those days, right? So I know what it's like to come up that path, and I try to help the next generation to not end up in that much of a struggle. It'll always be a struggle, but at least you have some guiding lights, you know, a path that someone like me can kind of push you into. I think that helps. So I do a lot with that. On occasion I do help underrepresented youth in where I live now in North Carolina, with actual coding, like boot camps, if you will, or cybersecurity boot camps. And there's a lot of value in that. There's another side to my life entirely, which is I've been in judo for 40 plus years. And so,
I forgot about that. Yeah. 40 plus years. My goodness.
Yeah, I started in 1982. And so I teach a lot of free clinics, to underprivileged youth as well. I used to teach when I was in New York. I used to teach at a pretty rough area in Brooklyn. I used to teach a group of 250 underrepresented youth, all as a volunteer. I just believe in trying to help these folks out in terms of, having some discipline, having a path, having some guidance. But yeah, I try.
You competitive judo?
Not anymore.
In the past.
I did. As a matter of fact, I competed for many years. I was actually part of the United States national team that went to the Pan American Championships in your country, in Lima, in Peru.
Wow.
And that was a very honorable experience for me. All of my sons are competitors and international medalists.
Oh, wow.
Trained by me in our garage. So yeah, it's just another one of those things in my life I take very seriously. I get very into whatever I do. I'm not one of those half-assed type people. I'm either all in or I'm not. So,
wow, I didn't know that dimension also, and it helps also the mind, the body, the focus, and judo. I'm sure I watch it. I never practice it, and it tends to be very, very competitive. You have to be in it. Very observant and understanding what is the right move to make sure when you strike, it is right.
It's more feeling. You learn how to feel things, and then you just explode. But you have to explode. The beauty of judo is that there's no time to think. It's a game of action, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny how that translates into the professional world, because in our industry, analysis paralysis is a real problem, right? People go into this thought cycle and then they just end up doing nothing. I've been fortunate that that's not me. I'm a person of action. If I fail fast, I bounce back and I keep it moving, right? And you experienced some of that at Bayshore. When we failed, we just bounced back and changed direction and off we went. And so, that's just part of my life. I mean, outside of everything I just told you, corporate-wise, career-wise, I wrote a book on my own, 600 pages, published in 2006. Had I not been the type of person I am, with 2 jobs, 4 kids, a wife, a house, there's no way I would have written a book, wrote that book, started a pen testing business before pen testing was, everybody and their grandmother was a pen tester or is a pen tester. I did it back when, as a matter of fact, when I wrote my book, the editor, she told me, use pen testing in the title. And I was like, what is that? She said, oh, that's what you do. It's called pen testing. Like, oh, okay. Because in the government, we pen tested everything. It was just testing. It was part of QA.
Yep.
It wasn't like this specialized field. You had to make sure everything was tight. So yeah, I wrote my book. I started speaking publicly very early in my career because of the book. And I think there's a lot of value if you have something valid to say, to share with the world. I think there's a lot of value in sharing, because otherwise, one of the greatest experiences I've had is I'll walk into a security conference. So my face is on the cover of the book, and people will recognize me and go, hey, I read your book and your book changed the trajectory of my career. That's rewarding. I've heard that at least 3 times. That's rewarding.
Wow, I didn't know that. We'll make sure for the audience to put a reference to your book, because this is about pen testing before it became officially recognized as a common practice that is now. I don't think how we can actually release any software or any program without doing the overall testing and penetration testing, meaning anticipate before somebody else does it for you and make sure they can do that. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's one of these things that you're willing to share your experiences and put it in a framework that other people can influence other people thinking. That's great. I guess we're coming in towards the end. Are there any thoughts, advice that you have for people that want to follow this industry, come in the industry, or how can they be best prepared, and even for people like us, the level of engagement that we need to have and recognize the fact that we also need to pay it forward, because I think we're the product of not only our parents that make sacrifices, but at the same time, people along the way that touch us and help us, where we are. So any departing thoughts and advice?
Yeah. I'm gonna go back to my point of balance, because I feel very strongly that, technical knowledge matters. Okay. Even at this point in my career, I could still sit down and, I wrote code for many years. I'll look at some code. As a matter of fact, I just did it a little while ago, and validate what somebody has told me in terms of whether your code actually does it or not. That's a skill that I'm very happy to still have. If I have to sit down and write code, I still do. But yet I'm a C-level, employee, executive, whatever you want to call it. Why lose touch? Look, think of it this way. Most CISOs are concerned about their packages and this and that. You think the bad guys are? They don't care. They're going to come after you no matter what. Your job is ultimately to be a protector, right? But if you don't know anything about technology, how can you protect it?
Yeah. So achieve balance. And the other thing, get out of your own comfort zone and be out there, right? And try to get noticed. Otherwise, nobody's going to do it for you, right?
100%. You cannot be shy in this industry. You got to be willing to put yourself out there. And if you fall on your face, get up and keep moving. But you have to be willing to put yourself out there if you want to grow. Mm-hmm. So yes, I'm a big proponent of getting out of your comfort zone.
Well, we've seen that firsthand, and I know you're a member of our advisory council, and many times you work with our other entrepreneurs, given all the experience you have, to help them shape their thinking, their strategy, their product. I think you're an architect at heart. I know you take pride to do that, because you can write code and, of course, but if you don't have that overall context and built in all these key characteristics that have resilience, that have, global, localized, all the different aspects, I guess you've been exposed to a lot. And in that regard, I consider you one of the most sophisticated members of our advisory council, because in addition to having the business acumen and having gone through experience of working with law enforcement, service to our nation, having to go into startups, big companies, global companies, etc., is something that, is very unique and makes us, have those superpowers. And I know you're always willing to help. So we really appreciate the relationship we have and with you at ForgePoint, and also the fact that you're always willing to help. So thank you very much for that, Andreu. And thanks for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate, listen, the relationship with you and the folks here. That's very special to me. I appreciate you. I appreciate you having me on this, and I hope we can even do more as time goes by.
We will. You bet. Thank you very much. It was always a pleasure.
Thanks, and likewise.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Subscribe to the Forgecast, which is brought to you by ForgePoint Capital. We're a leading cybersecurity and digital infrastructure venture capital firm that invests in exceptional teams protecting the digital future. To learn more about ForgePoint, visit forgepointcap.com or find us on LinkedIn and Twitter.